Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you for joining us for the CXPA webinar by Verizon about the GDPR and similar regulations and their impact on customer experience. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Molly Perrin, and I am a membership community manager with the CXPA. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you later today. The recording will also be made available on the webinars page of our CXPA website. And for our CCXP certified attendees, this webinar is CRC eligible and will be recorded in your account within 2 weeks. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please do enter them into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We will have time for some Q&A from the audience later on this hour. But now, without further ado, I would love to hand it over to our moderator, Peter Tomfohrde, to get us started.
Thank you, Molly. Really appreciate it. Hello, this is Peter Tomfohrde with Verizon. It's great to be back talking customer experience with the CXPA members. Today's topic, balancing privacy with customer experience, is something we at Verizon have a lot of passion about. Our industry implemented new customer privacy protections almost 15 years ago. At the time, carriers had become targets of private investigators seeking phone call records of individuals they were investigating. Although these investigations were extra-legal, they were not illegal. Working with the FCC and our industry peers, we implemented a series of privacy controls and ongoing employee training, which became known under law as CP&I, Customer Proprietary Network Information. So customer data privacy is really something ingrained in the culture at Verizon. Fast forward to today, customer data is digital. It's collected in a wide array of customer touchpoints, including websites and customer portals, mobile apps, chatbots, email and text messages, speech analytics on contact centers and IVRs, digital signage, and third-party social media. At the same time, governments around the world are rolling out new regulations such as GDPR, Global Data Privacy Regulation, CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act. Recently, Verizon teamed with Forrester to publish an in-depth report you see here on the slide, Balancing Customer Experience with Data Privacy. And you can go ahead and download that from the moderator and go to meeting. Today's discussion focuses on the CX design aspects of these privacy issues. Joining me today are two of the real leaders who focus on that junction point where technology meets customer experience. First, Art Schoeller, VP, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, and from Verizon, Gordon Littley, our Customer Experience Innovator and Practice Lead. Gentlemen, how are you this afternoon?
Doing well. Thanks for asking. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Looking forward to the discussion. Always a joy to have a chat with Art.
So to begin, privacy regulations are proliferating globally. You can see this from the figure on the right-hand side. This comes from Forrester, as provided in the report we drafted together. Gordon, what does it say about fundamental privacy rights that rules and protections have sprung up organically around the world?
Well, I think it says a couple of things, and the first would be we failed. We failed as a CX industry to protect the consumer.
Your Bluetooth's cutting out.
And I wish everybody was a CXPA member because they would understand. I'm sorry. Let me do something here real quick. I just shut my VPN off. So what I was saying, Pete, is I think we failed because government has to step in and regulate our industry. And by industry, I'm talking about anybody in the customer experience family. And it's a shame that not everybody follows kind of the routines of preaches in the sense of putting your customer first. Had we done that, we wouldn't have government stepping into control. So I think that's number one, not putting our customer first. The second thing is, I think, as digital has proliferated in terms of how we engage, both with enterprises and with our consumers, we've made some false assumptions on the expectation of that data, how we use that data, the ramifications of the use of that data, and how ultimately the end user would feel about that. I think those assumptions were misguided, as we've seen, in past six to 9 months. Our own Congress in the U.S. has focused on that, and you've seen CEOs of big companies, testify in front of Congress on how on this very topic and how data is used and how privacy is protected. So I think it's a challenge that we now all have to address head on. We can't avoid it anymore, and the regulations have now forced our hand at doing that.
Art?
Sure, Pete. I mean, I think that a number of times we race ahead, and then we find out once we've arrived somewhere that there were unintended consequences. Some might say that some brands really, it was not an unintended consequence to them, it was known. I mean, if you look at the more pointed questioning in the US Congress, really against some of the big platforms such as Facebook, the idea that the consumer is the product, the consumer data is the product, and it's being captured and monetized. And so monetization of experience, monetization of consumers by these platforms, kind of like is well, let's call it deep, dark, ugly. Everyone can respond to it in the press, but quite frankly, this is what has happened. That again, the monetization of us as a commodity and our information as a commodity bubbled up and across the globe, as you can see here, in terms of providing upward feedback to the governments in each of these respective countries, that, hey, instead of listening perhaps to the businesses and to the lobbying dollars, the consumer backlash is now big enough that this needs to be addressed. So to me, this is what has accelerated and has created this momentum. And it, as you can see from the map, not just here in the United States where we're speaking from today, but in countries across the globe. I mean, we hear quite often the phrase under the auspices of the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, which gives a lot of awareness to this, the right to be forgotten. And I think that, as an individual, if I really am dissatisfied with my experience with a brand, and I really do want to leave, I should have that right to leave and be assured that I have left. So it's this long-term trend and this monetization of our data that kind of got ahead of us, kind of got ahead of a lot of companies, kind of got ahead of a lot of country government and their regulations, and the result has been this consumer backlash resulting in regulations, which I believe are good regulations to have, and we'll see later as we talk more about that.
Well, it really takes us to the next topic here. Privacy is a North Star. Both Verizon and Forrester highlighted making privacy a North Star in our paper. Art, how exactly does that work?
Yeah. So, so many times when we are creating products and services, there is a focus on, what are the competitors doing? What's the features and functions? Is it a car that can get, in the electric car business, everyone has range anxiety. So can the battery get me more than, what's the number these days? I think it needs to be more than 200 miles on a charge. So that's the focus on the speeds and feeds, the functions, the features, and so on and so on. And, as CX professionals who we're speaking to today, are you joined at the hip with your risk and compliance teams, taking a look at designing privacy in from the beginning? And here's the compelling reason why you should do that. If there's one message from this webinar, is that consumers increasingly view this as a brand attribute, that they want from their brand the assurance that they will be protected and that their data will be kept private. So this is the thread that we all follow here as far as driving home this point as to why privacy is a North Star.
Gordon,
Yeah,
any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would offer, first of all, on the first question, because I think Art hit the nail on the head. What's the saying? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think if you think about how, you think about how social media works today, that's exactly the kind of services that we all engage in, because in some way or fashion we believe they improve our lives in some form. But you are the product in that world, and so I think that's key, because all these questions are related. And I think, just to reinforce what Art said, is if you believe privacy, or make privacy a part of your design strategy, you're going to improve your brand. And you've got to make sure that you do that. Simple techniques like jobs to be done theory, how I design a specific task a user is trying to complete, and how that data is used, and how you're putting the consumer in control of their privacy is absolutely key. And I think if you do that, you can turn privacy into an advantage for your brand.
Let's go ahead and dive deeper into that one, Gordon. As we talk about how data privacy objectives need to get into these digital transformations, customer experience designers are harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But all these systems that you just mentioned are capturing, personally identifiable information, that PII. What are you seeing on the ground with these new implementations, and how can the CX community help ensure customer contextual privacy is protected without defeating the AI-powered customer journey? Question to either of you, whoever wants to jump.
Yeah, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, so there is a real gray area here in the middle of what we recommend as best practices for customer experience and designing customer journeys and what happens on each individual touch point. So we've put on the table AI. AI works when it consumes lots and lots of data, and it gets great training data. And so the machine learners learn from data that is tagged as this was good, this was not good. And then it learns and it moves forward with a different way to respond to a customer that is the better response. Well, this is great. We can anonymize this and say that all customers looking for flight status speak about it this way, and pose the question this way, and use these words. And so it really is very powerful from a customer experience perspective to design these AI systems to look at customer intents and all the various ways they can be expressed, and all the little cul-de-sacs that people get trapped in when the bot doesn't know what to do, and then it goes over to an agent. But we also recommend, and this is part of Forrester's research as well, that we personalize. I know when I call my airline and it's on my cell phone, "Hi, Art," is the first thing I hear. And so it's like, well, that's my PII, okay? That's them knowing me, which gives me a great feeling about my brand. But did I consent, and did I approve, and do I know what they're doing with my personally identifiable information? As Gordon so aptly stated, and this was also in the documentary, The Social Dilemma, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Your data is the product. So this is a gray area that presents a great opportunity for CX professionals to work with the security and risk teams to find that right balance between great automation and then great personalized automation. And where's the right place to strike the right balance?
Yeah, great point, Art, because I think as consumers, the best service is service that we don't have to ask for. So
Yeah.
As long as I'm comfortable with how you're going to use my data. So I think, back, your question was what things are we seeing? And I think transparency is what's becoming evident. And that transparency has to be exactly how I'm going to use your data, what data I'm collecting, and put the consumer in control of that. Art used a great example with the airlines, and he felt good about being recognized when he calls. So that's his PII. How do I make sure I'm enforcing the protection of that, so it's only being used for me when I dictate when it's going to be used? And then I would also say, back to the the aggregation of data and the anonymization of data. That's a practice that I think is becoming much more and more used in across industries today in doing design. Those things that you can do where you don't need specific personal information about me to improve my experience, but things that everybody does to improve my experience. And I think that's a way to mitigate that balance that Art is talking about. But that's exactly what it is. It's finding that balance. You want to leverage it to your brand, designed to take advantage of privacy, designed to put your consumer in control. And all of those, you do all those things and you do them right, your brand improves, your brand image.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, listen, one of the elephants in the room certainly is compliance. I mean, just the word has these connotations of attorneys and outside auditors and 300 line item workbooks about, processes and custody of data. Gordon, are there any pitfalls you've seen or lessons learned you can share with the audience to help them avoid having compliance become the dominant designer of our next generation customer experiences?
Yeah, so I think there's a design component, and then there's an IT support component here. I'm going to let Art address the IT part of it because I know he is going to have much more to offer there. On the design side of things, I think, again, here's the example I would use. If you're not designing to protect your customer and improve your customer experience, you're going to fail. So that's going to be a repeated thing here throughout this session. But also just go back to, an analogy I would use here is back in the day, whiskey was the quality in whiskey was very bad. I happen to be a bit of an amateur bourbon connoisseur, but the quality of whiskey was really, really bad back in the day. And it was because of that one of the first Consumer Protection Acts was ever enacted, 1897, that long ago. And what happened was the people making bourbon decided that all of these people essentially deciding what their product should taste like and changing it and not even making it the way they were making it. They leveraged that to create a law that said, if you do X, Y, and Z, there's a list of about 8 rules that say something is a bourbon. And then there's a few more rules that say if it's bottled in bond. So again, one of the very first Consumer Protection Acts. And if you fast forward today, we're experiencing that same challenge. Everybody defines privacy differently. We haven't figured out as a community in the CX space to define that. So now governments are stepping in and doing that. But if we have that ability to define universally what something should be, what good looks like in any circumstance, then you can design to that and you can leverage it, right? So to this day, over 100 years later, whiskey bottlers are using that bottled in bond as a brand advantage because everybody who buys it knows something very specific was done, and you're going to be ensured a certain quality of bourbon when you buy that bottled in bond. So it's no different here. And I think when you think about compliance, you got to be able to leverage it to your brand advantage.
So going deeper on that one, Art, we've got move the moderator thing here. We go to risk and compliance. Given the severe financial penalties government and entities impose on enterprises in the event of a customer data privacy breach, where should brands first focus on bolstering data security to minimize financial exposure? And what does that mean for customers who will be engaged with the brand?
So, let's put a little bit of a framework around this, because we're saying fines, and the fines can be extreme and whatever. The one where a lot of people did sit up and take note was, again, because first of all, it spanned the entire European Union. GDPR sets fines that are up to 10 million euros, or in the case, it could be as much as 2% of the entire global turnover of the preceding fiscal year. That's a lot
It's a
of
big number
money.
for some.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of money, okay? And so it caused a lot of people to sit up and take notice. Any one of these is always achieving a balance between the various things that face an organization in relating to customers, driving revenue, driving profitability. And we can often view our risk and compliance teams as the Dr. No crowd with the 300-page document, as Gordon mentioned, okay? They're there for a reason. And our data protection officers, that really, it is their role and their job to look at this. They're part of the team, okay? At the same time, if we were to lock down the entire business, and I'm not suggesting we completely open the doors, I want to go back to that brand promise of privacy as a positive attribute, and communicating that in such a way that it boosts your brand, instead of being viewed as, oh my God, we got to do this because the risk team said we have to, and so now we've got to lock down what we do with customers. It is a balancing act. And what we documented in the paper was the role of design teams, your customer service leaders, like contact center leaders, working with data protection officers. And also, if you're rolling something out and you feel that it really hasn't dotted the I's and crossed the T's, you have an accountability as well to just kind of check in with the DPO and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. Earlier on is better, not late in the game as you're ready to roll it out, or after you've rolled it out and you saw something happen. So this is a balancing act that is going to be distinct and unique to every organization. And yeah, some of it's politics, okay? Some industries are going to weigh more heavily. I just got off the call this morning on an inquiry with a customer talking about the financial services industry. There are some categories of the work that they do where there are a lot of regulations. And think of a trader on a trading floor. The risk there sometimes is not just millions. And this goes a little bit beyond personal identifiable information, but trading
Sure.
between firms. But the risk goes into sometimes the billions.
Well, even under that 2% rule, some of the social media companies in Europe are looking at some very, very large penalties.
Yep.
If things don't go their way.
Yeah, and Pete, if you think about where brands should focus on bolstering data security, right, to your question there, one of the things that we don't do, or have not done enough of, I should say, is focus on our people who are having customer interactions and automating those things that can be automated to protect privacy. So think about automating authentication, for example. Think about training your call center agents to be cognizant of ways fraud is manipulated. And people, have emotions, and we have empathy, and social engineering is always a risk. So all of those things need to be thought about as first steps in protecting your customers' data and privacy.
Yeah.
So kind of leads into this one, Gordon, on brand equity. What advice would you give to the enterprise struggling to balance privacy regulation with the ease of doing business, with those very customers whose data you're trying to protect?
Yeah, so again, I think this goes back to what Art talked about, is striking that balance. So when you think about how consumers want things, right? We want expediency, we want personalization, but more importantly, we want it now. And oftentimes, private data, personal data, is a way to get it there now. So I think it goes back to, I said earlier on, that it's going to be a theme here, is your design techniques. Privacy has got to be in the forefront of how you design. and you can use it as a crutch, or you can use it to your advantage to manipulate how customers feel about your brand. If I feel safe about a brand, I had a, you know, I'm not going to name the bank, but one of my banks was hacked, and I lost thousands of dollars out of my saving account overnight. And the onus was all on me to regain my my identity with the bank. I had to provide a bunch of documentation to say who I was, my account had to be reset and reestablished, and all of these things. And so, you know, I have a suspicion of how it happened, but that's the other thing the company won't do, is tell me how it happened so that I can see if I can change my behavior to stop it. You know, I think that's another thing our industry needs to think about, is educating us on how, when we do get hacked, what did we do? Is there something we can do better to protect our own privacy? But, you know, long story short, guess who's not a customer of that particular bank anymore? So we know how things like this can affect the brand. And if I don't trust the brand, privacy is just one of the many things that could cause me to not trust the brand. But it's got to be in the forefront of building that trust and brand equity that's so important to earning and retaining customers.
Pete, I want to add in here, there's 4 areas that we identified in the paper that, you know, organizations are going to say, oh my gosh, what's the ROI? And I have to invest in it, and so on and so on. I'm not going to address the ROI right now, because you get into this world of the ROI of your brand equity, which you know, is reflected really in a balance sheet in what's called goodwill a lot of times. But let me go into these. One is consent management, that you're pretty good at every place you touch a customer, every place you touch their data, that that you have affirmed that they have consented and that you're tracking that consent. Number 2, and Gordon used the word transparency earlier, that when asked, you are able to produce, and again, there's IT system investments here and so on, but it's got to be secure. You know, how are you using my data? So what systems and so on. So for example, Apple, you can go to a portal and you can get this big, ugly laundry list of the systems that your data is in with Apple. So the transparency, being able to show where my data is, and if it's wrong, be able to make changes. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, as I mentioned earlier, and really kind of came into the fore during the GDPR timeframe, was the right to be forgotten. You know, I'm disconnecting from you as a brand. I want my identity to be wiped out within your business. So the assurance that that gets done. So that's number 3. And number 4, Gordon just gave a great example. How you manage a breach. I mean, I hate to say it, but the likelihood of breaches happening is unfortunately higher than we would all like. Do organizations have a process? Do they have that sort of crisis management? A lot of times there's third-party firms that can be engaged that go through and manage the whole breach process. The telemarketing center or customer service center to call that has people experienced in that, and that they can make the offer of the identity protection services. Here, we'll give you 1 year free for access to this identity protection service if you call in. So it's those 4. These are investments, but these are investments that in today's world, you have to draw that line of sight to the fact that it's going to boost brand equity by doing these things.
Yeah, well, certainly all of us in business have a desire and a pressure to present things with ROI analysis. One of the better ways I saw that presented, Art, working with some of our financial services clients, is they started putting a lens of churn against accounts. So with the example that Gordon raised, they've actually come up with metrics to say, hey, if we have a breach and we're sending these letters out, or, you know, even worse, we actually have to take action to restore funds or access or what have you, these customer accounts, they have hard metrics that say we're going to lose 7% of those customers. We know this, we've been through this. And the one that really jumps off the page, if you have a second breach with that same customer, which has happened, I've gotten the same letter from the same institution, the churn rate on those customers is very high. You know, the first one you'd be like, hey, it could happen to anybody. Someone gets churned twice. They had a very high metric on the chances that they were going to lose a customer if they had 2 breaches for them. So that's the one that I saw people hang their hat on for ROI.
How many of us, or how many people in our audience have felt like a criminal with certain institutions that you're trying to log into your own account, for example, because the authentication process is very cumbersome and detailed. So I think, to the point Art was making about finding that balance, automation is a way to find that balance, so that you can ensure safety and privacy, at the same time provide a much better customer experience without making the customer feel like a criminal, because you're asking them 5 questions to validate who they are. So,
and Gordon, I've been through some of those onerous procedures, and yet I've had other brands that I interact with that end up probing the same number of tokens, if you will, to figure out, is it art? And their processes were so much slicker than the other one. Very smooth, very friction-free. One was very tied into my mobile phone and just made it so easy. But to the point where they were still probing and testing the same number of attributes to determine, because I had the classic password reset routine. And it was like, what do I do to reset my password? And, with this brand, it was like, oh my God, what a awful experience that was. And with this brand, it was like, hey, I still feel like it's secure, but boy, did they make it really smooth.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, great CX design shines through. I mean, that's the passion of the community.
Absolutely.
Hey, Pete, Pete, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Pete. One of the things I was going to, Art, when we were preparing for this session, one of the things you talked about, it goes back to one of the previous questions about some of the things our listeners might need to hear about how you go about protecting the privacy. And you talked a lot about the multiple data lakes that exist within an enterprise and the things you have to consider about where all your data sits. I think that would be something the audience would be interested in hearing a little bit
Sure.
about.
I mean, look, we are spread across, we as individuals, and then the brands that we all work with as organizations. The word silo gets used so often it becomes trite, but it's true. And that since these regulations have come about, it has put an extra boost into what's known customer data platforms, or CDP, I think is the right definition of all of that. And customer data platforms, part of their promise is to kind of reach across and Gordon, I think you and I are of about the same generation, where it was databases, and then we had data marts, and then data warehouses, and now we've moved out of buildings and we've gone swimming. We're in data lakes now.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, I still smell silos here.
Yeah.
But the ability to point really incredible technology now at an enterprise and all the sources where there's all these attributes of customers, and basically internally crawl the systems and be able to pull out and be able to inventory what used to be a very manual type job for a good old database administrator. Okay. I mean, I remember back in the 70s when I was working in IT, and there was this, glorified job, not glorified, a great job, someone being a database administrator. But it is the ability and the extra boost of this need from protecting personal identifiable information that has made many organizations step up to the plate and say, boy, we got to invest in this, we got to do something. But at the same time, this can also be applied to, as we've got on the chart here, the omni-channel experience. If we're really going to help customers in those journeys as they drop breadcrumbs along their various journeys and the various touch points they interact with us, where do those breadcrumbs reside? What are those signals that tell us about what the customer is looking for right now? So there is a customer journey benefit here that goes hat in hand with the inventorying of where all the customer data is.
Yeah. Yeah, Art, it's funny because I used to be what is known today as data sciences. I was the database marketing manager, and back then it was we tried to know as much as we could about you and then predict what decisions you would make based on those attributes. How that's evolved today, though, and you referenced the social dilemma earlier, and to the audience, if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to watch that. I think for most people it'll be eye-opening as to how data is used today. But we've shifted from leveraging the data to predict what somebody's going to do to leveraging the data to actually manipulate what you're going to do, to change your behavior, influence your behavior. And we see that in the news all the time, all these accusations about influencing voters and things like that. But that's what social media does. It is intended to influence you to do something always. Back to that point Art made early on. In the discussion is if your data is the product, it's not you. It's not what the application you're using. You're the product. So very interesting times we live in.
Well, we went through some of that in my product marketing team, Gordon, a couple of years ago. As GDPR came along and we kind of saw the trajectory, it got here in the States before CCPA, and started rolling up our sleeves and said, okay, well, we comply with a lot of things. I mentioned CP&I. Well, of course, we're going to comply with this. And we started looking at all our records, and we said, well, where'd you get these customer contacts? It's like, well, we did a webinar, and a bunch of good people like the folks in this line joined, or went to a trade show, and here were all the people. And we really couldn't put our finger on, well, how did you get their contact? And did they consent to these things? And as we kind of went through this evolution, what started out as, oh, geez, I have to comply with something. And then the next thing is, oh, my gosh, I'm going to flush this database. We started to arrive at, hey, how are we assembling information about customers? And if there was a breach, or B, if they came in and they said, hey, Peter, show me what you're retaining on me. Would you be comfortable sharing that? And that's within my group, we kind of adopted our little old North Star became, treat the customer data like it's your data. It's your personal PII. That'll get your attention. And if you're assembling relationships between different sources of data, even if they're public, you start triangulating 3 and 4 and 5 different pieces of data about people that are publicly available. Is it starting to make you uncomfortable? And if it is, maybe you should stop. But it was very eye-opening in 2018.
It's very interesting, and I don't know the source of this, so I'm going a little anecdotal here on you guys.
Yeah.
I'm a researcher. I should be able to source things and fact check and all that sort of thing, but this one's more anecdotal. But I heard somewhere along the way that, all a company really needs out of your credit card data is as few as 3 to 4 purchases. That's all they need, and they've got you figured out. And it's like, oh my gosh, the AI is getting that knowledgeable or that intelligent to figure out a very granular segmented persona of me from just a handful of information. It is, and again, Gordon, you stated it, thank you for restating it. The Social Dilemma is a very interesting documentary as to, it's not just predicting our behavior, it is shaping our behavior, and now we're getting a little off track.
Yeah.
But,
I use the word manipulation.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, Pete. Sorry. We'll get
we're
going rogue on you.
We're good. Hey, Molly, if there are any questions out there, go ahead and solicit from folks. We'll keep going here for a little while, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But I will say the paper that we're talking about, mentioned it at the top of the broadcast. It is available. You can download it. For those who listen to this on rebroadcast, It's available on the Verizon website. There'll also probably be some emails that go out with you with the links. So please be sure to download it. I think you'll find it useful, and a subject somewhat related to what we're getting into, but going the next step, we're putting some finishing touches now on some primary research, which we're going to go into the ethical use of AI. So leaving the heavy hammer of compliance behind, we're going to go deeper into how customers react when they see that you've been using artificial intelligence against all these touch points to, again, deliver these wonderful curated customer experiences, but it becomes apparent to the consumer that you've been triangulating their interactions with your brand, either through your own channels or others.
Yeah.
All right.
So, Art, Gordon, any last thoughts? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
I would just end with, you put your customer first and put them in control of their privacy, and your brand will benefit. Simple rule.
And, Pete, since you've mentioned the paper, I had a lot of fun doing that paper with a researcher who was very passionate about the topic. In fact, it came more from her. As a research analyst, you like to try and figure out what do customers need? What's the information they're looking for? What are the, and at Forrester, we try to inform folks, not what's here and now. What we try to look around the corner, okay? What's coming at you that you don't know? And her passion for this topic, coupled with my experience in customer service, really brought together this concept of it's important to the brand. And it's because of increasing consumer awareness, it becomes a brand attribute. And I really wanted to drill down into this paper as far as CX and predominantly contact center leaders. A, you need
Sure.
to be aware of this, and B, what do you do about it? Either you're already working on it and your organization has a data protection officer and you're already aware and have a line of sight, or what do you do if you don't? How do you raise this issue and really make the organization aware and start working through the funnel of all of this and raise the visibility of the topic? Because I am just, after doing this research, I don't think there's a brand out there that can escape working on this and yet also find ways to thrive embracing it.
Yep.
Hey, Pete, we had a couple of questions. If you could take those. The first question is from Hamid, and it says,
sure.
What is your take on dark patterns and ethic CX design when it comes to cookies and GDPR?
Ethical CX design, or what would you say?
I think he meant to say ethical. Yeah, I think he meant to say ethical when it comes to cookies and GDPR.
Yeah, so Art, I don't know if you can talk to specifically how GDPR regulates cookies, but most websites today are already deploying an acceptance of use of cookies, and I think that's because GDPR requires that, and other entities are requiring that. So that's becoming more proliferated. I hate to sound like a broken record, but if the ethical use of cookies is protecting the customer's privacy and adding them or putting them in control of that privacy, then it's ethical. Yeah. I don't know how more simple it can be.
Yeah, I mean, Gordon, I'm just really piling on here, and basically reaching back to the 90s. Oh my goodness, this sounds like an oldies but goodies. For me, oldies but goodies was the 50s, but I can say the 90s here. We got started with websites and this magic of cookies. And the magic was being able to capture it, make use of it, and to use it as part of our, marketing information and who's interacting with our brand. And so the use of cookies has just become so ingrained in terms of the e-commerce and the whole web world and chief marketing officers and designing websites and what they can do with them. So it's like just in our DNA, okay, for those that are CMOs and those technologists serving those CMOs and what to do with their websites. And so this is a huge, huge shift that you're not going to get them, okay? Well, you might not get them, but you know, consumers are going to now consent. And this was really one of the consumer education things that came out. Some consumers annoyed because they don't know what's going on. That after GDPR went into effect, all of a sudden I got all these websites that are popping up this little thing, allow or deny, okay? And it's like, what does that mean? But it raised consumers' awareness. It's what the ethical brands did to comply and to show transparency. But you know, ripping it out really, really has been a tough thing for many organizations. So it's because cookies are so ingrained.
Yeah, transparency is key. Notification isn't enough. Transparency is key. There's been websites where it just says, by continuing, you agree to our cookies. I'm not going to go through and you know, read that document, so I don't continue. But others will say, you know, you agree to the use of data, and they give the choice. To Art's point, some don't give the choice. They just say, by continuing, you agree. I can, you know, if I choose to use a website without cookies, that's the ideal scenario. I may lose some sort of customer experience in doing that, but that's the trade-off that I get to make versus being forced down one way or another.
Yep, and you know, Gordon, this is so similar to in the voice channel. You know, for years and years and years and years, we've had the voice recording that says this call may be recorded for quality purposes. Well, guess what? And I can guarantee that unless it's a very educated consumer like me or you, okay, most people do not realize they've just consented to being recorded.
Yeah.
Because their opt-out is to hang up.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Right. Their opt-in is to stay on the line, and they don't even know that they're complying by just, oh, this call may be recorded for quality purposes, and off they go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Question.
Another question here. It said, this one may be for you, Art. Can you comment on controller versus processor?
So this is a very, very subtle difference here, especially when you get into the customer service world, where a number of times organizations will use an outsourcer. So I'm an airline and I use a third-party company to do all my reservation centers. So who is responsible? Okay, ultimately, at the end of the day, when you look who's responsible for the fines and setting policy, it's the controller. And when GDPR hit and a number of these other regulations hit, the contact center outsourcers really had to look at their contracts and retool their contracts to carefully delineate who's controller and who's processor, okay? In the case of the outsourcers, they are the processors. They are simply acting on behalf of the brand, who is therefore the controller and therefore the one who's liable. So anytime, and so let's extend that concept beyond just contact center outsourcing to any other, someone else operates your website, an agency or something like that. And this is something where your data protection officer is your guide. Anytime you're using third-party resources, it really is important here for any customer experience. As someone develops a mobile app, I don't care, or runs a mobile app, I don't care. Be very clear in those arrangements as to controller and processor, but generally, if you're the brand, you're the controller, and it needs to be explicitly laid out, because you're the one that then is liable. The brand attribute of protecting your consumers does accrue to you as the brand. It doesn't accrue to the agency that's running your website or the contact center outsourcer that's doing your customer service. It accrues to the brand. So you've got the benefit, but as the controller, you've got the risk as well. It's a very subtle question, Pete. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah. And one more here brings up an interesting one I hadn't thought of before. is there a minimum age limit on right to be forgotten? As children become more savvy than adults, what special issues do any of these legislations have on protecting children, or is it homogeneous across the age groups?
Well, I'll let Art answer that technically. What I would tell you is there are consumer organizations that want to be a part of your baby's life. Even they want to actually be part of the pregnancy, right? The whole period of maternity, and they will start marketing as such, and then they want to keep that customer for life. And so there is absolute data protect. My son just gave birth to our granddaughter, and then one of the first things that happens is somebody comes in and wants to take pictures, and you collect a bunch of information about that person, and then you're marketed to. And they bought some pictures, because who doesn't want pictures of their brand new baby? And he commented that since then he's had some things come to him that he wasn't happy about. So it's very interesting how things are starting at a younger age.
So
it's certainly, Gordon, in that area. I mean, that's where our next research is going. Is that when have you done something that's going to make someone uncomfortable? They will figure out that you the brand got a hold of the association with those photos, and you've taken action, and some may not be comfortable with it. But go ahead, Art.
Peter, I'm going to have to draw a blank here as far as whether or not all of these various regulations draw a line here in terms of age, and does it apply and does it not apply? But going back to the comment that if it's free, then you are the product. And Gordon's line of sight here into the idea that organizations, certainly want to establish an identity, and then that identity is another, entity to be marketed to. We're reaching down into youth protection laws as well when we get into this, and so it crosses over into that realm of protection of youth in general. And their data and their privacy, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as these regulations we're discussing today, I got to be honest, I'm drawing a blank on whether or not they've got any age restrictions at all, and that there is a cutoff line.
Yeah,
I'm going to go research that as soon as we are done here.
Yeah. We should have had that one in our back pocket.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, hey, Molly, I think that takes us through the questions. I'll go ahead and pass the ball back to you. Been a great session. Art, Gordon, thank you. I think it's a great topic, and I think we'll be back again discussing this and other variations of it in the near future.
Yeah, Pete, thanks for moderating. Art, always a pleasure.
Sure, absolutely. And a great big thanks to CXPNA and also to Verizon for sponsoring this as an opportunity to share Forrester's research. I'm very thankful for the ability to do this today.
Yeah, thank you all, Peter, Gordon, Art, for your contributions today. Thanks to the entire audience for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed hearing about some of the research that has been worked on, and hopefully you're walking away with some fresh new ideas and insights. As a reminder, we did record this webinar, and it will be emailed to you later today, and the recording will also be posted on the webinars page of the CXPA website. Another reminder, if you are a CCXP or CRC for attending this webinar, will be added to your count within 2 weeks. So I'd again like to thank our moderator and panelists for their insights today, and I'd also like to mention our appreciation for Verizon for their ongoing support of the CXP as a corporate member. So we hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.